Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk. Dave Frank is with me. My name is Eric Kirk. We're going to talk national news of the day. Of course, the big news again this week is the war in Ukraine. We're going to have a couple of segments about it. We're going to start in terms of, this is the first time although we're not directly at war, it is going to have consequences on the lives of Americans. It is obviously having a huge effect on the price at the pump. Gas was already expensive, as we know, having impact on inflation and being impacted by inflation. I believe it's the price of gasoline has jumped something like 40 to 50 cents over the past week since the war started. Actually, we're probably in the second week by now. And it's likely to continue to climb. The question and there's likely to be other sacrifices that we're going to have to make. I mean, we don't have much of a choice. It's going to happen. The war is probably not going to end anytime soon. Ukrainians are putting up a huge fight. It looks like the Russians have just been completely inept with their invasion, and we could talk about the military situation there. A lot of people thought it would be over by now, that they would have taken over Kiev and it would be an urban guerrilla resistance by now. But they have taken only one major city. They've bombed a lot of civilians, and they're not allowing civilians to leave. Every time they set up a ceasefire, they renege on it within a matter of hours and start shelling, where the people are trying to leave. But anyways, it's going on and on. And the question is, we of course have these sanctions that are having a huge impact on the Russian economy. The ruble has dropped to almost nothing. ATMs aren't working there, but it's bound to have an impact come back on us. And we've now barred Russian oil from coming to the United States. It only accounts for about 3% of our oil, but it's going to have an impact because it slows down it has an impact anyway, because Russian oil is going to be blocked in other places. Although Europe, they are much more dependent on Russian oil. They're not going to block that oil. But overall, it's going to have an impact, and prices of oil is going to go up because Russia is going to hold back its oil. And, are Americans ready for this, Dave?
Yeah, so we've covered this. Obviously, it's an ongoing crisis, an ongoing dilemma for our country's leadership, and the way we're framing this today is, is the United States ready? So I want to start by, the most recent polling that I saw. There's several different pollsters, probably many different pollsters out there trying to take the pulse of Americans. But the one that polling organization that stood out to me, News Nation, I looked into this a little bit, when I first woke up this morning, and I thought this was pretty insightful. So firstly, when they asked if people are paying attention, if Americans are paying attention to what's going on in Ukraine, about 84% said that they were following either very much or moderately. Only 3% of people said that they weren't following at all. So, as far as being on the radar of Americans, it's totally on the radar. It's a big deal. Yes. And so they were asking, do Americans support strong backing for economic sanctions, and like 70% of Americans said yes, including to punish Russian President Vladimir Putin, and 73% said they support supplying Ukraine with weapons to defend themselves, and 65% said they would support sanctions even if the measures start to result in increased domestic gas prices. There was a whole slew of other questions that were all sort of around that 70% and up point. And so it just when you put your finger to the wind, number one, people are paying attention, and number two, they're willing to sacrifice. So the question is, what does that really mean for the long haul? And we have heard that, well, this might end up being a 10-year problem if there's some degree of intransigence from Russia, not reading the tea leaves properly, and understanding that the world really is aligned against this action of their invasion.
I don't think the Russian economy can sustain this for 10 years. I really don't. But that's going to be very difficult. Something will happen there before then, but we'll see.
And we talk about each element of this independently. So we've talked about the geostrategic component, the macroeconomic component. We've talked about the military supply component. So there's all these different ways that you can look, different elements. You can kind of take a time slice of what's happening. But just depending who you talk to, and when you listen to some Ukrainians or you listen to some Russians, it's clear that there's a lot of unknowns out there. So one example, like you said, it's the United States when it comes to oil, that we get about 3% of oil. I heard today, if you take into account oil and natural gas, that America actually gets 8%. And so this is a fact. It could be looked up, and who knows what it really is. But the point is, it's such a small amount that we could conceivably make up for it with increased domestic production, increased output from the OPEC countries if they do finally come along and break with Russia in their OPEC plus arrangement. Or even from Venezuela. So we could get, there's overtures to them as well. So there could very well be ways that the United States can endure. But one little nuance here and I'll throw it back to you, that I thought was really interesting. When I heard the person who ran the poll describing the results, one of the things they said was it would have been really hard to include the question, should we're going to pick this up a little bit later, but should the United States get involved in that no-fly zone type thing?
Right.
And so, like I said, we're going to pick that up later, but the idea is that it's really hard to even know what people their background knowledge, their base level of knowledge that they have about what the costs and implications might end up being. So that's my way of segueing to, I think that there is some misinformation and disinformation issues. There's a lack of understanding of
as to
nuances.
what that even is.
Yeah. And so that our leaders have their work cut out for them to continue to bring us, they've got us engaged, and now they have to keep us in the loop, and also is supportive for how complicated and potentially troubling all the outcomes might be.
Well, there was some late breaking good news today. Apparently, there have been a lot of talks with the United Arab Emirates, which is one of the biggest suppliers of oil in OPEC. And they are apparently willing to talk to the rest of OPEC to talk about upping oil production. And that is a really good sign. Apparently, there is going to be a direct talks between President Biden and the Prince of the United Arab Emirates within the next few days. And they are also, talking about taking away the sanctions against Venezuela. But just it's not as much of a priority right now. And I think you mentioned before the show that some prisoners have been released, which might indicate that there's already been talks, some action towards that. But if that happens, and then they break from Russia, which I think is the second or third largest exporter of oil in the world, it means for the first time since the 1970s, OPEC will have broken. It's kind of like Switzerland, first time they've broken from neutrality. I mean, Russia may really have changed things around here. I mean, it's just and if that happens, if we can get the United States companies to pick up production, I mean, they lowered their production during the pandemic because of lower demand, and they really haven't picked it up. And there's this perception out there that Biden has lowered it by imposing these regulations, but Biden didn't shut down any existing leases. He just shut down future leases and future exploration on federal lands, and he didn't shut down the pipeline. The pipeline is still doing what it did. He just shut down the extension that was going to go through Oglala land. People seem to think, there was oil that was flowing and now it's not flowing anymore. That's not true. There's no less potential oil. So it's just, there's a lot to be said here, but so we'll see. But maybe this will also, for the long run, finally lead people to understand maybe we need to get away from oil dependency finally, but We'll see.
And oil has reached its highest price ever. So there is now the oil patch countries do have an incentive. They've got money flowing.
Right.
So the markets are responding in a way that allows them to conceivably come to the table now, which they have not done to date with
Yeah.
with President Biden.
Not sure it is in real dollars, but we'll talk about that another time. But we got to get to the next topic.
Last year, COVID-19 kept us apart. This year, we're finally together again. Tonight, 6 days ago, Russia's Vladimir Putin sought to shake the very foundations of the free world, thinking he could make it bend to his menacing ways. But he badly miscalculated. He thought he could roll into Ukraine and the world would roll over. Instead, he met with a wall of strength he never anticipated or imagined. He met the Ukrainian people. For more than 2 years, COVID has impacted every decision in our lives and the life of this nation. One way to fight inflation is to drive down wages and make Americans poorer. I think I have a better idea to fight inflation. Lower your costs, not your wages.
Okay, related topic. How is Biden's leadership in this? We talked, I don't know if we actually did on the last show. I don't think we had time to, because the last week was right after the State of the Union speech. He did get a bounce in a couple of polls, other polls not so much. If you go to the 538 polling average, he got a big bounce in a couple of the Marist poll and Ipso, and I forget what other, the Morning Consult poll, but not the QPAC. He's still down in the high 30s there. But his average is going up, and it's hard to say whether it was State of the Union or his handling of the Ukraine crisis. It's really hard to find any analysis of how well he's doing. He doesn't brag about the stuff. I mean, he put together, and apparently, you talk about, there's all kinds of rumors about how Biden has really put together this coalition and how he's behind the scenes doing all this stuff, but he doesn't brag about it. He doesn't come out and say, I put together the biggest and baddest sanctions ever. He doesn't do that, right? He's keeping low key. And in a State of the Union speech, he didn't sell it. And this is part of his problem. He didn't sell the pandemic relief. He's not selling the infrastructure. He's not really doing this. And this is kind of hurting the Democratic Party in the elections, midterms possibly. And right now he's not selling the things that he's done. But there are people who are starting to talk about the leadership, that he's keeping it cool. He's pulled together these sanctions. He's not overreacting. He's handling Zelensky doing, who kind of wigged out on him a little bit and praised Cruz and everything. He didn't turn on him. He's just like handling it coolly. This was before the invasion, and has been meeting with him and talking to him, making sure he's got the intelligence, sending the javelins, which have possibly rendered tanks obsolete for modern warfare. The javelins and the British NLAWs and other tanks. The Stingers are in there. They're taking down airplanes, at least the Russian planes, so that it's amazing. We're 2 weeks into this thing, and Russia still doesn't have air superiority. And we'll see if he's clever enough to see if he can get these MiGs in. It's a real complicated thing right now as to how to get them in without triggering a war, right? Without escalating it. This thing about the no-fly zone, as you were about to talk about, there's a big push to have a no-fly zone or a quote-unquote limited no-fly zone. No-fly zones don't really work. Even it didn't work over Libya really, and it's a real question. And especially in this case, the problems aren't really the Russian airplanes; they get shot down. It's the missiles, the cruise missiles that are bombing airports, and the artillery. I mean, that's So then, if the NATO forces start to engage them, it's war. It's war between Russia and NATO, and that's World War III. So it's just Biden has to really play it cool. He's under pressure from all of these. He is basically the leader of the free world, but he's not acting like it. He's not coming out and doing this. And so there aren't a lot of reviews out there. But if you go and you find it, you'll see, counselor on foreign relations people and stuff saying he's doing a really good job, but it's not out at the forefront. But he does seem to be creeping up in the polls. There do seem to be people, at least Democrats, coming home, and a few independents that see it. We'll see if it gets sold. Dave.
Yeah, so we've talked before about how there's some degree of three-dimensional chess going on. There's a lot of factors that you've got to keep in mind at any given time. And so now we're talking about Biden as the leader of the free world, but he's not out there bragging. He's actually behind the scenes making sure that there's some degree of continuity and also conviction that is not confrontational to the extent that it is escalating. So by that, what I'm getting at is, we'll give a couple examples. Now that the Russian military bogged down because of lack of use. The people are talking. I don't know if you've heard this before, but when that 40-mile caravan was bogged down, in part it was because they just didn't have. Their tires were dry rotted from just not being used. All those vehicles, and they couldn't get enough fuel to the front line. They didn't have practice with the logistics channels, resupply lines.
It wasn't a convoy; it was a traffic jam. That's what they said.
Yeah.
They couldn't leave the road because of the mud.
So a lot of people that I've seen, have said or talked to and heard and read, et cetera, that they thought, well, this is a temporary lull. But now we're on day 14. So the fact that President Putin has decided to shell cities, commit potential war crimes, and the International Criminal Court is sending an investigator, the risk to nuclear facilities, a whole slew of false promises with migration routes for people that wanted to leave. Russia is proving to be not a good actor here, and so Biden has to be real careful. But the no-fly zone is a big one that I think it's one of those things where if you would have asked people, do they think a no-fly zone is a good idea? And I'm paraphrasing here, but I've heard other people talk about this. Of course, no one wants Russian planes over Ukraine performing, missions and harming Ukraine. But a no-fly zone isn't just Russian planes not being there. It's shooting down those planes and also shooting down any other threat to the planes that are going to be forcing this, which means on Russian territory. And that escalation is pretty ugly. So there's been, and it's a non-starter. And so then the question is, well, what about these Polish planes that are MiGs, which are Russian made, that Poland said, hey, if you replace these old MiGs with new American-made hardware, then we'll just give them right over and for zero cost. And then the U.S. team, this State Department, Defense Department, White House, et cetera, they got together and they've decided we can't do that. Like we can't have it be the case that these planes fly out of Ramstein in Germany and then be seen contributing. Yeah, exactly. And so Putin has said, like, if you guys are going to do that, that's war. The truth is that Putin has said all of this is war, and these sanctions are war, and we're saying that you're committing war crimes. So it's one of those things where everybody's trying to have a contained amount of escalation,
right?
Because ultimately that leads to an exit ramp. Not to belabor this, but an exit ramp. We don't know how it's going to end. But if it's the case that I heard a former Russian foreign minister say this during the week. He said, "Look, Putin just needs to know at some point he's going to stop being such a belligerent bully, and he's going to realize that he's made some degree of error. He's going to look for a way out, and we have to give it to him. We need to demand a ceasefire and a withdrawal. That is the deal. And then the question is, what does he want in return for that? And we're not going to negotiate. We're not going to get the diplomacy done in a 10-minute section here. But the idea is that there's probably some things that are going to have to be given up, like sovereignty over Crimea. I mean, even I've said this before, but even Henry Kissinger has said that's the base of the Russian Navy. Like they're going to probably need that. It's an existential concern. To them, but the Donbass region, that's where the negotiations really going to have to be. When it comes to not having the weapons to defend themselves, the Russians are never going to get that out of Ukraine. Ukraine might have some degree of neutrality, like Finland potentially, but they're certainly never going to disarm. So you can see the lines already starting to be, forming around what's possible. But the question is, again, back to the original question. Managing the oil embargo, the United States gets 3 to 8%. Germany gets 50%. Europe gets 30%. There is an interdependence that is not negotiable. And given that economic interdependence, the fact that the Russian economy is being hit so hard, we can talk a little bit more about specifics maybe this time or next week, but the fact that their economy is being hit so hard it just means that it's trying to fast track changing Putin's mind.
Yeah, and this is the important thing here. Had Biden caved to Ted Cruz on sanctioning the European companies on that one pipeline, Germany may not have been so inclined to cancel that pipeline because they really need that, right? So, it was because of that we have this unity. Biden knew that had the foresight to know that if we're going to have this together, we can't be alienating them the whole time, and that was that was on his part. That was foresight, and he absolutely knew it. And I don't know what Ted Cruz is just not wanting oil to compete with Texas, oil. So, that was his whole interest. So he got his way finally, but this is, again, diplomacy. He's, his experience is come in with this. He knew it. And at that point he turned to Germany, obviously, and said, okay, now it's time. And Germany did it. I think they also talked to, Green Party people. It's really interesting because anyway, we have to move on. But it's just, there's a lot to talk about here. And so much to talk about what's going to happen. Personally, I think they should just fly the MiGs to like Algeria or something, and then they fly out of Algeria. What is Russia going to declare war on Algeria? Anyway, we'll deal with that. But we have to move on to the next topic. All right. A few weeks ago, we were talking about the Canadian trucker protest and how they almost shut down the economy and the car economy and blocked the main route. And so a lot of money was sent up from the United States, right-wing causes to supply that. But it was an organic demonstration. And, we had one that started down in rural desert somewhere here and went across the country. And it was, again, going to be about vaccine and mask mandates and freedom. And they traveled across the country. And I guess it picked up and got bigger as it went there. But it kind of got lost in the news. A few things have happened since then, and so and it's kind of interesting because I haven't seen a lot of discussion. I do watch Fox and all of that. You don't see a lot of talk about them on the right-wing media. You got it on the liberal media because they're all kind of curious whatever happened to them, right? And so they caught up with them, and they've been in D.C., I guess, for the past few days, kind of just driving around, and it's kind of hard to even know what they're doing. The mask mandates are all pretty much lifted. Mostly, and the vaccines, people are either taking them or not at this point. They're making their decisions. So it's kind of hard to even know what they are and what they aren't about. They were like, some of them were not wanting to go into D.C. because some of them thought there might be a trap. They might get trapped into, being sucked into another January 6th event because that was all a big, false flag thing or something. And so they're there. They met with Ted Cruz and Ron Johnson today or tomorrow, maybe. I'm not sure, but they're supposed to meet with them and some other people. What are they doing, and what are they about, and where are they, and are they at all relevant at this point?
Interesting times, right? So I guess these folks are, there's a lot of energy across the country for this, conservative team building around the power of the state, the power of the federal government that was exhibited during the COVID emergency. So whether it was state enforced mask mandates or state enforced other public health, quarantines and business shutdowns, et cetera, that there's a lingering mistrust and resentment about those decisions that are people are trying to political actors and organizers are trying to keep that anger and keep that energy alive for the midterm election. So like you said, they were in DC. Some of the leaders met with Ted Cruz, Ron Johnson, and also they're actually meeting. Like I thought it was interesting to just who they are. So I'm just going to name a couple of the leaders of the group. One was Lee Dundas, who was also someone who was a leader of an anti-vaccine group who was charged with entering the Capitol on January 6th, and was at a pro-Trump rally calling, I'm not going to say it out loud because I don't ever want myself to be recorded saying this, but killing people, right? So it's not good what this person has quoted. They're very energized. Also, the America Project supporting Convoy, this guy named Patrick Byrne, he's a former chief executive of Overstock. He was one of the people who worked with General Michael Flynn, trying to persuade President Trump to use the military to seize the voting machines. So there is an interconnection, this Venn diagram of life. And so this person, Mr. Braze, he's saying that the convoy needs to stay on message. And even though the states have rolled back, all the states have rolled back these mask mandates, and the temperature is way down on sort of the state governors' public health responses, that people are fearful of or resentful of the use of those powers. What the convoy leaders are saying is, above all, we also want to fight the federal employee vaccine mandate. So that's a real stretch from the Tea Party type energy that's going on at the Hagerstown Speedway, which is it's about 80 miles northwest of the DC. That's where they have they've set up a camp. And so these guys are driving around every day. They're taking a couple laps around the Beltway. But there's really a bigger, I'm going to put a quote in here. In the evening, the convoy returns to the Speedway, which has become a combination tent revival and tailgate party with communal food station, a barber, vendors selling pro-Trump merchandise, huge stacks of boxes containing JFK's anti-vaccine books, people in costumes, and live streamers everywhere you look. So it is a festival mentality, and that's a festival environment there at the Speedway. And they're saying they're going to stick around, but they don't really have a necessarily an incentive to do so for very long.
Yeah.
Oh, I said Jay. Sorry, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Vaccine book. My mistake. Thank you.
Right. No, they're waiting for JFK down in
That's
Texas.
right. That's right.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think they unfortunately for them, the war happened. And so there's just not a whole lot of discussion about the stuff. Also, the timing of it. I mean, all of the stuff that people aren't discussing it as much anymore because the mandates are being lifted. And you just, you can't come in and argue for something that's already kind of moot. So do you have other issues to argue about that people are feeling excited about? And then, and you're not going to come and block, DC. They had talked about, being there for the State of the Union address, right? And they were going to go outside and block it, but that didn't go so well last time they talked about doing something like that. And so, it's kind of, so they've just been driving around the Beltway Highway in circles. People have noticed them or not. They added to the traffic, but there's always a lot of traffic there. So, so, the question is, well, where do they go from here? And, I guess it's the next thing. Well, they meet with their stuff and then they go home. They have their T-shirts. I mean, that's about it.
So it's interesting. I mean, some of the spokespeople, if you look at some of their quotes, they intentionally don't want to be disruptive. They're intentionally drawing attention to their cause as opposed to they're not trying to overturn a particular policy. And one of the articles I read was basically saying that these are people who have their lives changed when they drew the line in the sand and said, I'm not going to listen to these recommendations from public health, and their families have been strained under this. So it's almost like it really is almost like a cult where their identity has to a certain extent shaped around some of these decisions that they've made, and they're looking to maintain cohesion and mutual support. So they don't have a specific policy that they need to be belligerent or confrontational about.
Yeah, they also picked a really bad time in terms of gas prices for this. I mean, it's expensive. One of them was complaining about the money that they were losing, and it's just They came all the way across the country. They avoided most of the cities. They went through Phoenix, but they avoided the cities coming through. They were worried about counter protests, but I don't think they didn't do a really good PR job. They didn't. I mean, they even where they left, it was a town in California I'd never heard of. In fact, I've forgotten it now. It's down in Southern California, out in the desert. I mean, you would think they would leave from San Diego or something like that, right? And it just, so I don't think they really thought it well out. The Canadians, they planned it out, but of course, the Canadian ones, they also did a civil disobedience that was, very effective and got a lot of international attention.
And just as a practical matter, you mentioned this, but I think it's worth repeating as we close this segment up, is that Omicron it spreads very rapidly, but its impact is much severe. Less severe. So the timing on that front allowed public health experts to change their policies and guidance based on the science and the actual outcome. Hospitals are not getting overwhelmed. While we do still have about 10,000 deaths a week, it's on the decline. And there are many tens of thousands of people still getting testing positive, but the public health offices aren't really thinking that that's a metric that's worth repeating on a daily basis any longer, because the severity is so much. Again, it's hard to wrap your head around, but it's becoming this variant has allowed a little bit more flexibility and freedom at the state level, and so the leaders I think have taken advantage of that to roll back the restrictions that had generated so much contempt.
Yeah, and may have even created a natural herd immunity that may be preventing other variants from coming in. We'll see. All right, we really haven't talked about January 6th a lot. There's not a whole lot of new developments with the committee itself, but there are some developments with the trials, and very interesting development. Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio, I hope I'm saying the name right, a leader of the Proud Boys, but what's very interesting about his arrest is that he wasn't even present at the Capitol on January 6th. He's being arrested for conspiracy and charged with conspiracy. And this is very interesting. In fact, there's going to be a conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, and assault, 2 counts of assault and resisting and impeding certain officers and destruction of government property. I mean, he's being charged with conspiracy for that, for the stuff that didn't happen. Now, he was not there, but he was involved he was there 2 days before, vandalized the Black Lives Matter banner at the historic Black church and a few other things, and also possessed a couple of guns and things like that when he was there. So he's got some serious things going on, but this is a big deal. This is this is going to the top. We have other big news, but why don't we discuss this first?
Yeah, so one of the things I thought was most interesting about his indictment, just beyond what you've already said, he took credit for encouraging other Proud Boys for being there and for taking part in the riot and some of the things that they're being accused of allegedly. So in a way, he's being accused of being the ringleader because of something that he said we took credit for. But they arrested him so that he didn't participate. And so what I was going to say is, what I think is interesting is that it's been, leaked out now or covered now for the first time that he actually has a really colorful background, that he has been an informant in federal and local law enforcement cases for a long period of time, working undercover with investigators down in South Florida, working closely on many different cases, according to the Miami Herald, I think it is, that he, the federal prosecutors, the FBI investigators, his own lawyers have all said that he's been involved in getting more than a dozen people charges against them for various drug charges, gambling charges, human smuggling charges. So he's basically got a long record of working with justice, forces of justice, the legal community to get people in trouble. And he was picked up right before the 6th so that he got himself into less trouble. I think, I'm not one of those people who thinks that there's a lot to that, but I think it is interesting and colorful.
But the real important thing about this is definitely now taking it into the phase of this wasn't a spontaneous event. This is now taking in, this was a planned event that, a coordination. And does it then take it further? If this was a planned event, was it part of a bigger thing? And that could be, does it get bigger than that? Did anybody coordinate with them who had an agenda? A larger agenda, and we don't know. That's it's just. But we do know that there were congressional people who were in contact with them, and at some points, was it just small talk or support kind of a thing, or was there were there actual promises of commuting sentences or whatever, or that type of thing. I mean, it's a big development here, because this is now tying it back. It's not just on that day, random kind of stuff, happening spur of the moment. This is now turned into something that is now more three-dimensional, not two-dimensional.
And so, Eric, I know you're going to pick this up, but I want to throw it to you. I want to frame this for you, that the Enrique Tarrio indictment is not. We've buried the lead here. The lead here is that Guy Wesley Reffitt was the first conviction. So you want to tell us a little bit about
this
that
is the
conviction
first,
and the importance of it.
First jury conviction. All the other convictions up until now have been entering pleas. This is a jury conviction. 49-year-old Guy Wesley Reffitt of Texas found guilty on 5 criminal charges: transporting a firearm, furtherance of civil disorder, obstruction of an official proceeding, entering remaining restricted area of grounds with a firearm, obstructing officers during a civil disorder, and obstruction of justice, basically threatening his children if they became witnesses against him, his then 18-year-old son and his younger teenage daughter. He's basically sent a text, 2 of them, which the son turned over. His son apparently has more liberal politics. I really want to know what the dynamics there are, and basically said, if you turn me in, you or your sister turn me in, you are traitors, and traitors are shot. That type of a thing. And he turned in all recordings on his cell phone and text messages, and basically threatening a witness. And he was convicted on all counts. Jury, half women, half men, found it. The wife apparently is as crazy as he is encouraging all of the other defendants to not enter plea bargains, to take it all to trial. So now we have, this is the first time this is now tested in front of juries and a jury. And this is a big, huge deal, because this is going to have an effect on all of the others. Now people are probably going to be more likely to enter pleas, because I think they all thought, oh, this is fluff. I won't get these. And this guy's going to probably get pretty stiff sentence for this stuff.
Exactly. I think that's what I was going to pick up on, is that just that charge, just the final charge, that last charge of threatening his children to keep him from turning him over to the authorities. He faces 20 years in prison for obstructing justice. So the potentially these are very, very severe and strict charges. And so just to put it in perspective, the importance here is that most of these other cases against the other alleged people involved in the insurrection, conspiracy, etc., or riots, depending how you look at it. Certainly, criminal trespass and interference with an election process and an official proceeding. All those charges, that bundle of charges, that's going to be thrown at many of these people. And now they have evidence that it actually did stick, that it went all the way through. So the prosecutors and the defense lawyers both are aware now that the government can use these charges, and that the government has successfully convinced jurors that these things basically are holding up in court. So this is actually a pivot point, I think, for many of these 200 or so people that are facing charges.
Now this guy is particularly unsavory, threatening his kids. I mean that's that. So it makes him particularly unlikable. But still, this is it is now tested and tried. The people have where a lot of the defense attorneys like, well, is this our jury really going to take these things very seriously? I mean, well, yeah, they did all 5 counts. Apparently the jury understood what the charges were, understood, and it was really hard to get a jury. People who were saying that they couldn't be affected by what they saw. I mean, it's really hard to get, on television. People in D.C. who didn't know one of the cops, who were involved. It's very hard, but they did, and they got it. And this is a big deal because there are still hundreds more facing it, and they're sweating now.
And my last thought on this, Eric, I'm not to interrupt you, I'm sorry, but
sure.
is we're a political show ultimately, right? And so we're talking about the political implications. And so there are people that say that that this was not a big deal on January 6th, and it's overhyped, and that people are looking at maybe the wrong news sources or the wrong information sources. But it's really hard to argue with a federal law case that has gone through its proceedings, and when someone is found guilty by a jury of their peers, who knows what the sentencing is going to look like. I think we now are at that point where people they at least have to take input and they have to at least hear and process that, hey, people are going to jail for this. Maybe I ought to look and reassess my biases about what actually happened that day.
Well, let me give you my view of what happened January the 6th. It was a violent insurrection for the purpose of trying to prevent the peaceful transfer of power after a legitimately certified election from one administration to the next. That's what it was. With regard to the suggestion that the RNC should be in the business of picking and choosing Republicans who ought to be supported, traditionally the view of the National Party committees is that we support all members of our party, regardless of their positions on some issues. The issue is whether or not the RNC should be sort of singling out members of our party who may have different views from the majority. That's not the job of the RNC.
Okay. We've been talking for months about the midterms coming up. Of course, the Republicans are hoping to retake Congress, both the House and the Senate. Of course, things are not going well for the Democrats between what's happening in the real world, inflation and all of that, and a lot of issues within the Democratic Party. But the Senate Republicans are up against a few problems, and some of them are internal. We've talked, of course, about the civil war going on between Trump and, as to whether or not Trump is going to force Republican candidates in both the House and the Senate into positions that are just untenable, especially in what are called swing states or swing districts. And that is one issue that they've had. And also, but even beyond Trump, they've lost a couple of very almost easy wins because of, I believe, Mitch McConnell. For instance, in New Hampshire, they lost Sununu, governor. He almost certainly would have won that race, but he was talking to people about it and saying, so what is the agenda? What's the legislative agenda? And the Republicans were saying, well, we're just going to block things. We just, we don't want to pass anything. We just want to block things. And that's not what he wants to do. He wants to go there and actually accomplish something. And he's looking at, even when they were in power for 2 years with complete power, they didn't really pass anything. He says, that's not what I want to do. I'd rather stay governor in New Hampshire. Similar thing with somebody who had less of a chance because he's in Maryland running against popular Democratic senator, but the governor there, a moderate, saying, I don't want to go there and do that. I don't want to go there and just block. I'm not there just for the power. I'm there to accomplish something. So their best candidates are not running, so they're losing opportunities for that. And they're running crazies. and they're taking stands. I mean, and they have a chance that a crazy will win in Ohio, a state that they should win easily, but they're up against Tim Murphy, who is a lot like other candidates, Democrats who do well there, including what's his name, who's the senator there right now, Brown. Do I have that right? Yeah, Jared Brown. And if they send a crazy up against him, the guy, I'm forgetting his name, who's like all in on Stop the Steal, then he could lose. Anyway, I mean, there's just and Ron Johnson is running again. Wisconsin is not Oklahoma. It's a purple state that's kind of leaning blue lately, right? And he's got a great opponent against him, the lieutenant governor. Good campaign, raising a lot of money right now. I mean, and then there's the Rick Scott memo, which I understand you talked about with Aaron, which called for raising taxes on lower income people and
cutting everybody. Everyone should pay taxes.
And cutting Medicare and Social Security, and he's in Florida. I mean, it's just so much that Mitch McConnell had to say, "Whoa, no, excuse me." I mean, and Democrats already are fundraising off of that. So, I mean, it seems like they're looking to seize defeat from the jaws of victory. Dave.
Yeah, so that's a great segue, actually, because if President Biden's approval rating being so low in the high 30s is proxy for where the Democratic Party stands nationwide, then they don't have to do much. The whole Mitch McConnell plan, which whether you agree with it or not, the idea they're just going to block everything they disagree with and stand for effectively nothing other than tax cuts and some minimal other core set of ideas like liberty and other sort of generic non-policy ideas. So there is a schism that we now have identified within the Republican Party here. You mentioned Ron Johnson, and so it's actually been sort of it's been hyped up as a controversy this week, because he is outspokenly blaming Mitch McConnell's leadership and his leadership team for just not standing for anything. He's saying we have to stand for something. We're not going to encourage our base. We're not going to drum up our base unless we get out there. So he has endorsed Rick Scott's plan, which it does include some very controversial things, like you mentioned. He said everybody needs skin in the game. Well, if you've got no one under $40,000 or so of income paying any federal income tax, that means a third of the American taxpayers who work are not paying federal income tax because they don't have enough federal income. They pay other taxes. But for the Republicans to step in and say, we need to raise people's taxes, Mitch McConnell says no. So that's a sort of easy low-lying fruit example. But Ron Johnson has said that he thinks that it was a failure to not have something in place for the Obamacare Affordable Care Act. When they decided to repeal and replace, he said we should have had something. Like, if leadership has let the party down. He's called a bull in a china shop. I saw that quote in a couple different places. But colleagues are willing to support him. There is a group within the Republican Party who's saying that, like, we do need to stand for something. We need to make an affirmative case to get people to go out and vote. And so Senator Schumer, to his credit, picked up on this and said, "Oh, it sounds like that the GOP needs a hurting working families caucus," as a tongue-in-cheek way to reference the Working Families Party that is part of the progressive movement within the Democratic Party. So this is I'm not trying to overstate the differences between the factions of the party, but there is a certain amount of harm. There's a certain amount of harm being done to not having a unified message and for criticizing the leadership. So Ron Johnson and others in his corner have not actually come out and said they want Mitch McConnell to no longer be the leader. But there's a quote. He says, "I'm frustrated about everything about this place." This is a quote. Do I agree with everything in Rick Scott's plan? No, I don't agree with anybody 100% of the time. I support him telling people what he's for. I don't see anything wrong with that. And so McConnell is basically saying, like, look, it's, we just don't need to do this. We don't need to, like you referenced, are they shooting themselves in the foot? And so McConnell and his allies are trying to hold the party together and not have people leave based on the climate of, between the Trump sort of third of the party that is active and unruly, and then the Ron Johnson folks trying to keep them energized. McConnell, I think, is in a tougher spot than he would have been in otherwise.
Yeah, and he's got. See, the problem with Ron Johnson is he went all in also on Stop the Steal. He's completely in on Trump now. He's going to downplay that. He's also been uncharacteristically quiet about this, whole thing. In fact, all of the Republicans and right wingers, all of a sudden, Fox News are really quiet about all of the pro-Putin things they said before, right? I mean, they just completely are reversing themselves, but. Their Democratic opponents, or possibly even the Republican opponents in any primaries, are going to bring this stuff out, and so they've got problems. And all the Democrats have to do to hold the Senate is win wherever Biden won, the states that they won. And everybody's saying, well, maybe things will be soft for Bennett in Colorado. Bennett's not going to lose re-election in Colorado, even with the Olympic athlete guy there. Kelly's not going to lose in Arizona, most likely. I don't think so, especially with the governor guy, not running. So they've got another one there. Possibly Black Salt will defeat Cortez, I think her name is, in Nevada, possibly. But even then, she's raising a lot of money. Will Herschel Walker beat Warnock? I don't know. With Stacey Abrams raising all that money, there's going to be a lot of excitement there. And Herschel Walker is untested as a candidate. There's a lot of questions about him, So, and then Pennsylvania, and Ohio, there's a lot of stuff going on there. They just have to lose that. North Carolina, there's a lot of questions. I mean, there's a lot of currently held Republican districts that can lose, I think, more than Democrats. Democrats could actually pick up seats in the Senate. So,
yeah, that's all what I was going to say, is that we're going to get into it a little bit more because the primary season is coming up real soon. And so we're getting, California, we're here in California. Our California primary is in June. So we got 3 months and it's heating up. We're going to cover this more closely, but it's, just finger to the wind. It's a little bit or even a lot closer than it may have appeared just as recently as, 3 months ago or 6 months ago.
Okay, this brings us to predictions. Go ahead, Dave.
So I recently became made aware of an issue that I think we're going to see unfold as the elections get closer and closer. People will be more aware of it. It's called the independent legislature theory. So Republicans from Pennsylvania and North Carolina challenged the redistricting in their states, and they used this as the legal theory. The Supreme Court, in making their findings, didn't actually fully endorse it. Instead, these maps were adjudicated on procedural grounds. But it turns out that they did, scholars and commentators are saying that at least 4 of the justices have indicated they do embrace this theory of an independent legislature. And so just to give an example of where this sort of originated, or at least where it came to my first attention, a long time ago, during the Bush v. Gore case, then Chief Justice William Rehnquist concurred with the opinion that said Article 2 of the Constitution that state legislatures have near unchallengeable authority to decide how presidential electors get appointed, and the federal courts may need to step in to make sure that post-election state court actions don't frustrate the process. So that one sentence has become this theory of the independent legislature. And so now, knowing that at least 4 of the justices seem to have endorsed this, what does that mean exactly? It means that there's going to be a consolidated power over election administration in key states dominated by GOP legislatures. They could be free to draw lines unchallenged, passing new restrictions on voting unchallenged, and taken to the extreme, some people say it could give them power to override the choice of presidential electors after voting takes place in their states. So this Stop the Steal and all this complaints that we've seen on the past election probably are going to come up again. And what that means for us, well, we'll tap into this commentator, Rick Hassan, election law expert from University of California, Irvine. He says he doesn't support this theory personally, but, quote, there's a lot of potential for nuance here. Even if you have a majority of justices that agree that there's something here, that might not mean that a state violates the standard. But if you take to the maximal position, it's an earthquake in the American electoral power. So my prediction is that we will see an earthquake in American electoral power in our next election, and we need to prepare ourselves for it.
And that is really scary, by the way. That is an existential threat to fair elections across the country. I'm also have a prediction about the Supreme Court. So far, pretty much every gerrymandering case that's been brought to the Supreme Court, whether it's been brought by Republicans, by Democrats saying that there was a racist gerrymander, or by Republicans complaining that the state courts have forced them to do maps based on gerrymander, the Supreme Court majority has basically said, leave us alone. We don't want to bother with this. Every single case whatsoever. They basically are saying, we're not going to do anything before this next election. Whatever maps are coming to us, we're letting them stand. And we've got now 4 states left that don't have maps that have been submitted. We've got Louisiana, which is up for a lawsuit because they've got that one district that has all black. They link New Orleans with I forget the other town, but it's all where they really should have 2 black districts. That's going to be hit with a lawsuit, but it's not going to go anywhere. And Missouri as well. They're going to try to destroy one of the 2. Anyways, those are going to be stopped. Who knows what will happen in the long run, but nothing that's going to affect this coming election. So the gerrymanders that are happening, Democrats have come out of it okay, actually, but the Voting Rights Act for this coming election is basically dead, except where it's being enforced at the state level. And that is what the Supreme Court majority has decided to do. And it's a bad time for voting rights.
Little did we know our predictions would be so complimentary.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is the way things are. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged. We'll see you next week.